Hello everyone, we're in Pirkei Avot, Parak 3, Mishnah 1. Let's go. Akavya ben Maharal Omer. Akavya ben Maharal says, look at three things and you will not come to sin. 1. Da me'ayin bata. Know from whence you came. Know where you come from. 2. Ulan ata olech, and to where you are going. 3. Velifnei mi ata atid liten din v'cheshbon. And before whom you will in the future give a judgment and a reckoning. Me'ayin bata, where do you come from? Mitibas kocha, from a putrid drop. Ulan ata olech, limkom afar rima v'tolea. And where are you going? To a place of dust and worms and maggots. And before whom you will give a judgment and reckoning. Before the King who reigns over kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. So now, the question is, what is this meant to be teaching us? What's the goal here? And the Maharal asks a couple of really important questions. He asks a number of questions. We'll focus on two. His first is, what's the point of these first two teachings? As in, da me'ayin bata, know from whence you came, ulan ata olech, and to where you're going. You come from a putrid drop, and you're going to another lowly place, the place of dust and maggots and worms. How does that help me in terms of the crucial part is da lifnei mi'ata liten din v'cheshbon. Know before whom you are going to give judgment and a reckoning. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, as long as a person keeps that in mind, then he's good. What's the point of the first two in terms of think of how lowly you came from? Okay, why don't you think about this? Think about what is the goal of your life? What's the end goal? In what direction are you headed? I think that's much more important to think about. Once a person thinks about that, then hopefully they'll have a certain clarity of vision and be able to act accordingly. That's question one. Question two is, this could actually be very destructive. Says the Maharal, right, if a person thinks that he's worth nothing, right, and he's this kind of lowly creation, he'll just come to despair. Right, because in any case, he's not going to be able to elevate himself, and he'll come to sin, because he'll say, I've just despaired of all of my actions. So the Maharal is bringing up a very good point. This is a fairly well-known idea, that the way a person views himself will then, he'll act in accordance to how he views himself. And this goes both positively and negatively. If a person despairs of his actions, he says, you know what? I'm worthless. Nothing I do is worth anything. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm not smart. There's a saying I've heard that whether or not you think you can, you think you can't, you're right. Now, it's a bit extreme, right? Just because you think you can doesn't mean you can, and just because you think you can doesn't mean you won't. But I think there is a lot of wisdom there in terms of how do you see yourself? When you look in the mirror, what do you see? According to what you see, that's how you'll act. And so if a person sees himself as this, I come from nowhere, I'm going nowhere, I'm a nothing, that could be a very spiritually destructive path to go on. Not only spiritually destructive, but certainly physically destructive. So what's the goal? And just as an analogy, I regularly bring in fiction. So there's this show, Game of Thrones. Never really watched it, but I did read the books. And so Jaime Lannister, right? Not the most sympathetic character when you first meet him, but in the third book, A Storm of Swords, and I think later on, I'm assuming the third or fourth season, we get to see a bit more of him. Now, this person didn't act in the most noble way possible, but we see once he kind of has a reckoning, he puts on the white cloak, if you will. He becomes a king's guard. That's one of the most prestigious positions in the land. This is, again, Game of Thrones it's a fantasy work, takes place in what substitutes for like the Middle Ages in Europe. And he comes at night, and not only is he at night, but he's one of the king's guard. It's the 7 best knights in the realm, supposedly. But it comes with a certain aura of responsibility and prestige. And he then becomes the Lord Commander. He's the chief of the King's Guard. And you see, there's a saying that like the white cloak changes a man. It changes him. And what's fascinating is this is something that percolates in his mind. He's like, I'm a member of the King's Guard. I'm the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. And he looks at his predecessors and he starts thinking, is this what I would have expected? The people I used to look up to when I was a boy, is this how they would act? Am I acting in accordance to how they would view me? And that's a very powerful impetus to change. And that is why I think, people will be like, I'm a bat melech, I'm a princess, or for a Jewish male, ani ben melech, right? I'm the son of a king. That means I'm a prince. If a person were to think like, I'm a prince, or I'm a princess, then think of what do we expect of princes and princesses? A certain level of dignity, right? And so if we think of ourselves in that way, we might start acting in accordance with that level of dignity. And so we see that this Mishnah is trying to highlight that, this Mishnah seems to almost contradict that principle. So what's it doing here? Why is it doing that? Says the Maharal a very powerful and important principle. He says like this. It's going to teach us, this Mishnah is trying to teach us how to remove the cause of the sin. It's very good to deal with the symptoms, but if you don't get to the center of the illness, the cause of all these symptoms, then you could keep cutting away all the branches, but the roots are still there and the trunk is still strong. It'll just keep sprouting more branches. As long as you don't destroy the cause of the sin, then you're in for a rough time. Things are not going to go well for you. He'll come to sin. So how do we deal with that? So he says, the reason why we come to sin is the Yetzer Hara. Now it doesn't sound like such a earth-shattering chiddush. Thank you. The Yetzer Hara causes me to sin. What does he mean by that? It says the Maharal, what's the point of the Yetzer Hara? Why? It's in order to preoccupy us, to distract us, to expel us from the world, to engross us in what it thinks is important. It's coming to destroy the foundations, the building that we're trying to build. Now, what exactly does he mean by that? What he says is, when a person is engaged in these Yetzer Hara thoughts, right? It's because he thinks so much of him, so highly of himself, becomes arrogant, or he thinks, I'm the center of the world was created for me, I want to indulge and enjoy myself. Then you'll come to sin, and you'll be distracted by all the things in your way, all the little candies that you see. It could be physical candy, or it could be this is going to give me this. People will think very highly of me if I do this, or if I go here, if I wear these clothes, or if I act in a certain manner. Now that's just a distraction that may not be moving you in the direction that we want to go. And he says that, okay, but why can't we just think? Well, think of where I'm going, right? I'm eventually going to have to justify my actions before the King of Kings. But says the Maharal, even if you know that you're eventually going to have to give a reckoning, when a person's Yetzer Hara overcomes him, he sins. And he doesn't think about the future reckoning. Now that's very true. I'm sure we can all personally relate to this idea. When a person's absorbed in something that he really wants, and he's like, look, what do you think? You know what's going to happen. Or he does do something and they ask, what were you thinking? He'll be like, I knew it was going to happen. I just wasn't thinking. I just wanted to do it. It's a disaster. And that's exactly what happens. So what happens is when we think of where you came from, you're a future drop, and think of where you're going towards, that'll, I think, help temper a person's selfish motivations. It'll help broaden the scope of their vision, and they'll get a sense like, maybe this isn't worthwhile, because they won't think of themselves in such a haughty manner. And that's how the Maharal tells us to rein it in. In fact, there's a beautiful shir given by Rabbi Gershenfeld that we've spoken about before that says, when it talked about Moshe as an ish anav, what does anav mean? Says Rashi, he's a shafel v'savlan. He's a shafel, he's lowly, just like we said, and he's a savlan. He's a porter. It doesn't mean he's patient. A porter means he's active, he's proactive, he's engaged, he's doing. And when a person thinks of it that way, he's shafel. Think of where you came from, where you're going to, and then that's the lowly, that's the shiflut, that's you being lowly, and then you have to be a savlan, a porter. You have to go and do things and be proactive, because you have to realize, I have to eventually give a reckoning. So we'll leave it over there. We'll see you next time.